YouTube, Dosm here. This is going to be my video discussing the current state of the drama and discussion over the future of the Power Rangers franchise. What else is new? It's the end of the Power Rangers part 547 for this fandom. Anytime Power Rangers makes any sort of move, it's the apocalypse. Like, there'll be like one paint mistake or Chase will get released early without an announcement and they're like, Hasbro killed it, we're dead, no more Power Rangers. Power Rangers has been canceled so many times, like by the fandom and literally, and it's still standing. And I think that's worth noting, and I've already talked about this before, but there's been a lot of drama recently around the future of the franchise, specifically around some of the recent reports that Hasbro made at an earnings thing, as well as, of course, the recent Lightning Collection drama. Now, I'm just going to be giving kind of a paraphrased recap of what was said, just to discuss my thoughts on what it means and, you know, what's good, what's bad. And then the second half of the video is going to be some hot takes, so buckle up. So, basically they had an earnings report, and it was kind of spun two different ways depending on where you looked. There was some stuff about some of the profits being down, which of course had people immediately stocking their fallout shelters for the end of Power Rangers again. You know, this all reminds me of that cult in Parks and Rec that thought the world kept ending and then kept doing the celebration for the end of the world, and it never happened. But there was that, but there was also some stuff that said Power Rangers had growth last year, and they're still going to be doing the Entwistle reboot, which is another funny side note, is that I saw multiple articles and tweets about, confirmed, reboot still happening. It was never in question. Like, why are we re-reporting this? Anyway. But they confirmed they're still working on it, and they're still working on the brand and the brand's future. But it's basically like what I said in my previous video, talking about, does Hasbro care? It's like, yeah, they're still working on it, but it's not their top priority because it's a little bit more of an iffy franchise. You know, Power Rangers is in a weird spot. It's not like totally obscure to where it's unknown. It's actually pretty decently known, but it's not like a real deal big franchise like Star Wars or Marvel, and it's not even as recognizable or popular as Transformers and Turtles. I make it sound like I just undersold those franchises there, but you know what I mean. There's kind of like a scale, like a loose scale would be like Star Wars, and then you got Transformers, probably some other stuff, and then PR's kind of like at the lower end of that. Like, it's not completely unprofitable or anything. It's got a lot of potential and a lot of buying power, but it doesn't have as good of a position as the other franchises. So from what I glean from this, is they're still going to be working on it and trying some stuff. They're being cautious, but it's not their #1 priority, which is exactly what I thought, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I just want to say right off the bat, I don't think Power Rangers is going to be canceled like people think it's going to be. I think there's a couple different options. I don't think we can know one way or the other. I think, you know, a lot of fans will just basically kind of make up stuff doom and gloom, and even me. Don't take what I say. This is just my opinion and my thoughts. Like, you'll have higher-ups in the fandom saying what they think is going to happen, and people take that as gospel. And that's just not true. The truth is, none of us know anything about the future. I can just speculate. But again, as I mentioned in this video and previous ones, Power Rangers is thought to have been canceled numerous times, and I think that the honestly worst case scenario, I mean, obviously a true worst case scenario would have Power Rangers being canceled, you know, canceled, and like we wouldn't see it at all for a long time. I mean, I guess that's always possible, but I think even a true worst case scenario won't see Power Rangers disappearing completely. I think we're in a very decently mid-ranged position right now based on everything that's going on. Obviously, a lot of focus has been put on the Lightning Collection QC issues, which obviously, yes, it is a problem right now. The fact that I bought 2 Izzy figures that broke when I thought about looking at them is ridiculous. It needs to be addressed. It's much more of an issue than what I believe to be the previous non-issues. But this need not be more than a speed bump, guys. You know, people are acting like this is the end of everything. It is a bad spot, and if it doesn't get fixed or does get worse, it can become a worse bad spot. But again, it need not be more than a speed bump. It can be fixed. A handful of waves that are more brittle with missing pieces is, again, small in the grand scheme of things, and it doesn't even necessarily have to impact anything to do with the TV show or the reboot. I'm not saying it's not a problem, I'm just saying it's a problem with a lowercase p right now. It can be solved easily. You know, it's not as big of a deal. It needs to be taken seriously, and it needs to be fixed, but again, it doesn't need to infect the outlook on the entire franchise. So that is definitely a problem. One other thing I wanted to just touch on too in regards to people's concerns about Hasbro is people will often point to the fact that we get so few updates and things like that as a fact that it's bad news and they don't care. And I mean, I can understand that, and sometimes when companies are quiet by things, it can be a bad thing. And just to play devil's advocate with this, I feel I'm defending Hasbro when I say this, and I'm not trying to be an apologist, but in this case, I think people need to be more understanding of two things. It's like, number one, I think a lot of this comes from people believe Hasbro is doing something negative because they're not behaving the way they want. Fans want updates every 5 minutes, and because they're not getting it, that means that it's bad. And that's just not true. They're just behaving differently than we're used to. And when there's no news, guys, there's no news. You know, they can't just manufacture news. And I feel like if they just kept saying, you know, oh, the reboot's still happening every 5 minutes, that would just get boring. So just because they're not behaving the way you want doesn't mean it's a negative thing. Also, I brought this up numerous times before. I'm sure that there is some actual real deal problems going on and some hiccups and mistakes behind the scenes in regards to the reboot and any other future plans. But you also got to understand, remember the pandemic? That set everybody back, and I know that we're, you know, moving back more towards more normal stuff in regards to production and everything. But it seemed to me like even before this, they were really taking their time with the reboot because they didn't want another 2017 situation on their hands. So they were already moving slowly, trying to figure out how can we do this best and land this and deliver this in the most effective way possible. And then the pandemic hit, which not only set them back production-wise, but it changed the landscape, where now that's why we're getting a Netflix movie and series instead of a theatrical movie, because it's just not as much of a sure bet. I mean, you already had PR never having a surefire hit in theaters, but then when the dynamic of theaters changes, I'm not saying that's the only reason that things have been slow, but I think people need to consider that they probably were really cautious about, like, crap, what if this fails? You know, at movie theaters, we got to figure out how to get it in theaters and be successful as possible. And then suddenly theaters weren't an option for multiple reasons, and people seem to forget that. You know, we are in a bit of a weird spot in regards to the reboot and what needs to be done with it and what's happening with that. That's going to be for my hot takes. I'll just say that in regards to this really, for me, doesn't feel any different than any other earnings report. I feel like anytime we get any sort of earnings report or update from Hasbro, you have half the people spinning it as positive and half as negative, and I think we're always in the same spot. Honestly, again, like I said, a true worst-case scenario could happen of it just being canceled, but I honestly believe the absolute worst case scenario, if everything goes wrong with all of the projects and the TV and the entertainment and the toys, is we'd be in for a scenario where Power Rangers would have a very quiet presence. I don't think it would go away. I think there would probably still be some, like, merchandise releases for, like, oh, mmpr, you know, figures and weapons every now and then, and some lightning figures. Maybe the comic continues. Just a very quiet kind of, you know, the franchise is in a coma presence. I believe that's the worst case scenario, but I don't even think that's going to happen personally. But that's what I truly believe would be the actual worst case scenario. I think the most realistic scenario, if I'm being, I don't know, objective and accounting for some of my personal worst case scenarios, some of their more ambitious projects and ideas of expanding and taking the franchise in different directions don't take off, and they're forced to retreat back to effectively what we have right now, which is Cosmic Fury, Dino Fury, Beast Morphers style Sentai adaptions, and we just continue with that for the foreseeable future. I mean, for me, that's a worst case scenario because that's not what I want, but I feel like that would be one of the more realistic bad scenarios, that the more ambitious things don't work out and we just end up reverting to the status quo and end up in a Neo-Saban-esque purgatory where the franchise is more or less where it's been, you know, where we have these, you know, average adaptions with a handful of expected to average toys. I honestly think that was probably what could happen if the negative naysayers have their way, because whether PR can take off and be bigger is, you know, a bit of an unknown and a bit of a risk, and I can't say for certain what will happen. But I don't think we're in as bad a position as we think, especially when you consider every other week the fandom is predicting the end of the franchise. So that's just my thoughts. I think absolute worst case scenario, it doesn't disappear completely, but we always have the option of going back to the safety of what we have right now, which isn't necessarily what I would personally want, but I think that could be a likely scenario because the franchise has proven that it's able to exist in a not necessarily fully relevant state, but a sustainable state. I mean, we could be in for a lesser version of what we have now, but I think that's the worst case scenario. Now, again, coming in for some hot takes here. You know, if you guys follow my channel, you know I'm known for that. I kind of think differently than a lot of the fandom, I think, just in terms of what I want. And I want to say that, you know, all this is just my opinion. This is not me saying that my opinion's important or valuable or that I think this should happen, and because there's certain things that I want that they should happen, I think that's a mistake that the fandom makes. And I wanted to talk about this in particularly in hot takes because when conversations like this happen surrounding the franchise's future, you know, when it's like saying, like, you know, the franchise isn't as much of a priority, people will talk, especially fans, like, there's so much potential Power Rangers has. And yet those same people, whenever the idea of expanding its potential comes up, they say, no, it has to stay the same. You have to stay in Sentai. And that drives me crazy because like you're talking about the potential, but then when we actually talk about the potential, you don't want it. And I understand that for a lot of people, the Toku Sentai adaptation aspect is your favorite thing. That's totally fine, you know, but that doesn't mean it's going to be for everybody. And I think it's kind of selfish to say like, no, because I want it to be this way, no one else can have it any other way. And I think that in terms of the fandom outlooks, that's a mistake. They can't see past their own fandom box in this case. And I find that to be incredibly frustrating. I mean, there's certain things that I want and would like to see, but if it ultimately doesn't happen, or if there's a better way to expand the franchise, that's going to be the way to go. And I think that the fandom forgets how small we are, you know, as the hardcore fandom, I mean. Like, the Power Rangers casual fandom is pretty decent size, but I'm talking about the hardcore fandom that's watched every season, that knows what Sentai is, that watches Sentai and, like, loves the tokusatsu stuff. Like, they think that, okay, because we like this is the only thing that can work for everybody. And that's just not true. And in my opinion, this is just my opinion. I can't back this up with any sort of facts, but this is my outlook based on the perception I've seen from like sort of casuals, whether it be in person or online. A lot of the core fandom will say if Power Rangers stops doing Sentai, it will fail because that's what Power Rangers is. But in my opinion, I think that's what's holding it back. I think it creates a more negative perception for the casual public. Just because PR is in a very weird spot in regards to public perception, where it's simultaneously this thing that people remember as, man, Power Rangers was awesome, but it's also lame as hell, man. Like, that's basically the take people have on it, because it does have this weird, cheap, cheesy look, made even worse by the switching between footages, especially in the older shows. And yes, that is what makes it unique. That's absolutely true. It's one of the things that makes it unique, especially to start. But to say that's the only thing that makes it unique, or the only thing people like because that's what you like, is wrong. You can't say that. Like, there's things that I like about it. Like, for me personally, it's the world and the universe that I like more than the Toku aspect. But that's not me saying, well, I like that more, so that's what everyone else will like. You can't say that. That's just not a good way of thinking about it. And for me, just based on the perception I've seen, I think that cheesy, you know, vibe and that Toku aesthetic, for lack of a better word, is a bad look. It doesn't look good, and I think it holds it back from being more mass appealing. And the idea of it becoming a more traditional superhero live-action show is not appealing to a lot of the people that like the Toku aspect. For me, that is appealing. Like, again, this is the hot take section. In the recent years, I've discovered more and more, as we've gotten into things like the Power Rangers comics and Hyperforce, and, you know, even some of the deeper lore you've been getting in Dino Fury, combined with my fatigue at some of the repetitive cycles of Sentai and Rider, I've realized more and more, like, just it's making me realize things I've always known, but it's, like, more solidified it, that some of the stuff I like about PR has more to do with the world and storytelling, and how fundamentally little, in a lot of ways, the Toku format is important to me, if not unappealing in some ways. So if we lose that, it's not as important to me, so I feel like I'm seeing a little bit differently. Coming back to that thing I was saying about my perception real quick, is, you know, this is a very small little, like, example of evidence, but, you know, one of the biggest responses I've ever seen to Power Rangers franchise in regards to the casual fandom is the Shattered Grid stuff. I can't speak to everywhere, but I was really taken aback by my local comic shop having discussions almost every time I went in there for the latest issue about Shattered Grid. You know, it was only maybe 2-3 times where it was like other, you know, fans in there, but like I always discussed it with the people that worked there, and it was kind of like these people that knew, you know, the franchise when they were younger, like watched it as a kid and then moved on, and were surprised that, like, holy crap, this thing that was like this cheesy 90s thing is telling this story that I'm actually looking forward to. It's kind of like this, am I looking forward to a Power Rangers comic vibe? And I feel like that could be done if we hone in on taking advantage of some of the universe and storytelling aspects, and not just the, oh, it's cool because it's got the foam robots and the interspliced footage. I'm not saying those things aren't appealing to people, but I'm thinking that there could be things that hit those casual buttons even more. And my point with all this is that the idea of PR changing and feeling less like it does now, not having the adaptation aspect or a tokusatsu feel, is scary to them, and a lot of people don't like that idea. But Power Rangers can never grow if it doesn't try something new. I truly don't believe if it stays in its current state, even if they pour more into it, being this Toku show with, you know, the adaptation aspect, I don't believe it can grow just doing that. I don't think the general public, it's more of a niche thing. It's not something that I personally think can take off. Not impossible, but I think it will be much harder than making it a more traditional Netflix Power Rangers show or an animated show. I just think that that is worth exploring. I think it can be difficult. I know people point to the 2017 movie of like they already failed once. Yes and no. I mean, I think that there was a lot of circumstances surrounding that. I honestly believe there was potential within the 2017 ideas to succeed. I don't think it was solely the material that failed. There was a lot of reasons behind that, because there is cases of dozens of TV shows and movies that are considered to be well done and later on, you know, appreciated, that because of various circumstances outside of that failed. So that just because it didn't do so well doesn't mean it was bad or had bad ideas. That's a side tangent altogether. End of the day, final point in this hot takes tangent is, I think what they need to do is at least give these other formats a shot. Make a more traditional superhero Netflix show like they're making. Maybe make something animated. Give it a shot. Try your best. Give it your all. You know, really put all your cards on the table with that. And if it doesn't work, we can always go back to the Toku one. But the fact that people don't just want even to try is what's so frustrating. I think ultimately the smartest solution would probably be doing this reboot Netflix show that's more traditional, and then keeping the Cosmic Fury live-action show lane, so you can keep both fans happy, and then you can much more easily go fully back to traditional PR if this doesn't work, but then at least you're trying, you know? And then maybe in between, try some animated adaptation films of the, like the comic story, like they do with DC. I think that could be a cool way to try different avenues, to expand things, but leave your safety net there. But the bottom line is I think we need to go beyond what we're at. And I think the fact that we can't see beyond that is very frustrating. But that's just my hot take. Again, I think very differently, and I'm not saying get rid of everything that we're doing with PR. Again, I'm very different. If we did get rid of a lot of the Toku influence, I wouldn't bat an eye. But I think that we do need to expand beyond it and at least give it a shot. And then at least we'll know. Because right now we don't know. And that's a lot of the thing too about people say, you know, Hasbro's failed or they're going to fail. And it's hard for me to take that seriously when they truly haven't even gotten to put their own stamp on it yet. I think I'll be able to form a much more of a clear idea of that once we actually see the reboot and the animated and whatever they want to do, when I get a feel for what actual PR right now is. Because right now it's more like a Hasbro repaint variant of Saban. I want to see what they actually have in store. But that's just my take, guys. If I want you to take away anything from this video, it's not me trying to be negative or attacking people or anything. It's just, it seems weird for me to say stay positive because I'm a very negative person by nature. But I think that this fandom constantly doom and glooms PR, and I don't think it's going to be as bad as you're thinking. I think we're in a mixed rough patch right now, but I think we still have potential. And I just don't listen to the people that are saying it's going to be dead or that Hasbro is trying to kill it on purpose. I think that there's still hope. And like I said, in my opinion, absolute worst case scenario, I don't see the franchise disappearing completely because it's existed for so long, even in smaller states. It's one of these franchises that while it's not big franchise, it's a franchise that has enough staying power to at least be present to the degree that even if we go in a quiet period, it could stay around so that it could have another potential resurgence, however small. But that's about it with this one, guys. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell so you get notifications for my videos. Dosm Writer, signing out.